Welcome to tonight's tale, a fairy tale theater podcast. We are going through every episode of Shelley Duvall's Fairy Tale Theater in alphabetical order. I'm your host, Emily. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, joined by my co-host, Eric.
Hi, I'm Eric from New York.
And this month, we're joined by our friend, Ashley.
Hey, I'm Ashley, also from New York.
Ashley, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in fairy tale theater?
Sure. So I'm a Broadway performer and writer. I've worked on a lot of great pieces. I've worked in, like I said, on Broadway and extensively in New York, as well as in film and TV in Los Angeles. I've worked in London. I'm a two-time best-selling novelist, and I have an especial knowledge and love for fairy tales and children's literature, I guess, sort of between 1810 and 1912, especially. But I grew up reading my way through the fairy tale section of the library. I was that kid at, very young who was very interested in those stories and how they, reflect us as human beings. And I grew up on fairy tale theater. And fairy tales and their origins and sort of their deeper meanings play a really big role in a lot of the work that I do and a lot of the things that I write and the pieces that I'm drawn to. I had a very successful play that ran off Broadway called Snow that is an exploration of the importance of storytelling as viewed through three disparate storylines that all revolve around the fairy tale Snow White, and including the origin of how they were collected and then how the story changed over time. And they've just always been one of my favorite things and meant a great deal to me. And I've become known as something of an expert on them in a world that sort of more and more has kind of drifted away from and forgotten their origins. And so it's wonderful for me to be on this podcast and to get to talk about it.
Oh, we're so happy to have you. And
I'm so happy to be here.
and this month we are reviewing the episode Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So at the very beginning, what is the first thing that springs to mind when we think of this episode? Ashley, I'll start with you.
So many things, because to this day, it's my favorite adaptation of Snow White. So if a lot of people ask me for recommendations, and I always say, if you're going to watch one film adaptation, watch the fairy tale theater one.
Aw.
But so many things. But I think the thing that from the first time I watched it really captivated me about it was the relationship between the Queen and Snow, which is something that you really don't often get in adaptations of this fairy tale. And especially when the Queen is Vanessa Redgrave and Snow is Elizabeth McGovern. Come on. So many things. I could literally talk for hours, but I think if there's one thing that has always stood out to me, it's how they dealt with that element of the story that I always found really intriguing.
Oh, I love that. Eric, what's the first thing that springs to your mind when you think of Snow White?
Definitely the casting as well. I think Vanessa Redgrave is everything camp, everything fabulous, the red crimped hair. Like, I just think of her automatically.
Mm-hmm.
And I also really love Elizabeth McGovern in this because it's just a very subdued, very innocent version, probably the most innocent, subdued version I can think of Snow White portrayed in any filmed or animated version. And she's just so different and she stands out for me. So I do agree with Ashley that this one is just, it stands apart from all the other adaptations. It's very different. It's very true to the Grimm story. And
that's a big one. That's a really big one.
Yeah, and I remember seeing this one. This was the first one I saw aside from the Disney version. So when I saw I was already familiar with the Disney version, and I saw this one when I was very little. I was like, wow. So the Wicked Queen tries to kill her several times. That's crazy. So I didn't know that. And I think that really, that was what is so special about fairy tale theater, is that it keeps these adaptations so fresh, but then also so very loyal to the original text, which I really appreciate, which is why we love it so much. So
yeah, for sure.
We do. This is a pretty special episode. It's one of my favorites. Pretty much every fairy tale theater fan I've talked to, when I ask, what's your favorite? And it might not be their tip top, but it's always in the top 5 for everybody. Everyone loves this episode. For me, the first thing I thought of, actually, my answer's a little different from you guys. I think of Vincent Price as the magic mirror.
Oh my gosh, yes. He's just so over it.
He's so dry, and he and Vanessa Redgrave have great chemistry.
Yeah.
I love him as the magic mirror. And then, of course, Elizabeth McGovern looking more beautiful than any woman ever has a right to look.
Yeah.
She just looks so. That was a great word you used, subdued, Eric. That's it.
Mhm.
She looks very pure and absolutely beautiful. And I like Rick Smith as the singing prince.
Yes. Yeah.
And the other thing I noticed is they cast real dwarfs to play,
Hmm.
or real little people to play the dwarfs, and they gave them all their own personalities. They were a part of the story, which I
Hmm.
think that's a little bit of a nod to the Disney version more than the original fairy tale, if I'm remembering correctly. But everyone was at the top
Yeah.
of their game.
Well, and they
Definitely.
cast the best little people actors like ever.
Tony
They're
Cox.
yeah, they're incredible, and they were in tons of stuff, and to see them all together in one piece is really extraordinary.
So, how
Mhm.
familiar is everyone with the source material? I'll go first because I've got a short answer. I've read it. I remember this being very faithful. Been a very long time since I've read it. I do remember there being a previous darker version, kind of like Rapunzel. It goes even darker than what the Brothers Grimm wrote, but
Yeah.
I'm afraid I've got a little bit of a vague answer. Eric?
I am a little bit familiar with it. I know that once I saw this version, I did seek out actual storybook versions when I was younger that, because I was very intrigued, like I said, that it was so different than the Disney version. So I know that I did do some research when I was younger, but I know it's been a long time since I've read the original text.
Ashley, I think you're pretty familiar with the original fairy tale.
To my knowledge, and within the ability of any person to be able to do this, I believe I've read and seen every version of the story that is accessible to be read or seen.
That's impressive.
I think so. I think I have. Anything you want to know, let me know.
That's wonderful to hear. What do we remember thinking of the episode when we first saw it? I remember loving it. I remember the music being soft and gentle. I remember Elizabeth being lovely. The word I wrote down was delicate. I thought this was a very delicate episode, just beautifully
Mhm.
directed and acted. I can't remember a time when I did not love this episode. Eric?
Same. This is one that I revisited often. I don't think I own this one. I think this was one that I had to rent often from the library when I was younger. I think I purchased it way later in life, but this was one that, yeah, I always loved. I always really liked it a lot.
Ashley?
Yeah, I think it was my first exposure to fairy tale theater. It was the first one that I checked out. And I actually didn't own any of them growing up because they were expensive. But it was always a big thing whenever I could go and check out a video, which one was I going to check out? And I picked this one kind of over and over and over again. So it was my gateway drug to fairy tale theater. And the fact that I chose it so frequently, when like frequently I could only choose one. And so as opposed to something else that Snow White is not actually my favorite fairy tale, The Little Mermaid is, but I would kind of keep coming back to this because it was my favorite fairy tale theater episode. So I think it speaks very highly to it that it was the one that I kept choosing, even over fairy tales that were I preferred, and even over sometimes getting one that I hadn't seen before.
You're a fellow Dane like me. We gotta love Little
I
Mermaid.
am. Yeah.
We gotta
Oh,
love
love The
Little
Little
Mermaid.
Mermaid.
It's in our DNA. Eric, do you have the background information on this episode?
Why, yes, I do. Snow White is season 3, episode 5. It aired on July 16th, 1984. It was actually filmed July 18th, 1983 to July 22nd, 1983. And
A
so,
long
yeah,
back
so like a
time.
whole, yeah, they
That's a
took a
lot.
year
Yeah, a year. That's
to try
unusual.
to, probably to add in all the smoke and all the all the things they needed to add in, build the little landscape, the little town, the little kingdom. And it was directed by, once again, Peter Medic. And it was written by Robert C. Jones of It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World fame and
Oh,
Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and lots of things.
wow.
So that's interesting.
It's
And
quite
the
pedigree.
And the one thing that I have to make sure to point out is the art direction, Jane Osman, fantastic. And then, of course, the music department.
Yes.
which was the music was mixed and recorded and all the things by Chet Himes.
Do you know, because I know each episode was based around the art of a specific artist, like Rapunzel is Klimt. Do you know which artist this episode was based on in the design?
The art direction is based on the illustrations of N.C. Wyeth, who
Okay.
I'm not overly familiar with him.
Oh
Because
yeah, MC Wyeth. MC Wyeth is the American illustrator that uses a lot of light kind of mixed with some fantasy elements in his work. He did a lot of actually stuff with like knights and things too. So that in Treasure Island, the famous cover of Treasure Island.
that's one of my favorite posters, by the way. I do love this poster
Yeah.
for this.
Oh, yeah, gorgeous art
Beautiful.
direction. Starting our rewatch, we begin with Shelley's introduction. She's sitting in a pink dress. She's on the set where I think where we'll later see our singing prince. She's tossing an apple and giving a sweet little introduction.
Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. Welcome to Fairy Tale Theater. Tonight's show is adapted from the classic Brothers Grimm tale about a jealous queen whose vanity destroys her and almost destroys our heroine, Snow White. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
I liked this introduction. I thought she looked quite pretty, and the apple was a nice touch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the panning out, and I love Shelley in this dress and sitting on the tree stump, and I love that she tosses the apple at the end. It's just, for me, it's perfect.
Yeah, I agree. It's great.
Yeah. It was just a nice little touch. Then we get our music. I'm a flute player. I noticed that this was a flute solo. I think Peter Davison wrote the music. I know it's the composer himself who actually played the flute because I asked that one. I thought the music was quite pretty in this episode. We haven't really talked much about it.
I really love the use of harp later in the episode.
Yeah.
It's really, really pretty and charming and unusual for a lot of scores.
Yeah, the flute and the harp. And I'm sorry to say it, but a lot of fairy tale theater episodes used a lot of synthesized music. And this, you could tell they were real instruments being used.
I love this music in this episode. It's so well done. We had many episodes where it was just like, it felt, to be honest and not to be rude, it just felt like an afterthought. Like it was just very synthesized, very like, but
Yeah.
this felt so thoughtful and so meaningful, and not even like, I mean, they had a singing prince and they wrote actual songs for him, that worked for him to play on his little, what do you call that, a ukulele or whatever. I mean, it
I
worked
think it's a little
perfectly.
mini lute or something.
Yeah.
Rex Smith actually wrote the songs that he sang himself. He did tell me that.
That's so cool. I love that.
I think it was only like two little songs, or I mean, even bits of songs, but Rex Smith did actually write those songs himself.
But the score is just beautiful. I mean, and it
Yeah.
also I like Rex Smith songs too, but the score is just, I mean, it works in every scene, like from the beginning. I mean, it's beyond. It's so good.
Yeah, it's very atmospheric. We open up on a bit of a dorky model. We get to see a model of the forest and the dwarf's cottage leading up to the castle. Any thoughts on the model?
I like it. I mean, it drew me in as a kid. It really like, I was like, oh, because it's so different than the other episodes. I mean, they had a really sad looking one in Jack and the Beanstalk,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I feel like this works, like with the snow covering everything, and like you're like when you're watching it for a second time, you're like, oh, that's the dwarves' house, and that's, you're pointing out all the things from the fairy tale, and it really just for me, it drew me in as a kid, and I appreciate it this time watching it.
Yeah, no, I agree for sure. It's beautiful. It's beautifully done. And they also incorporate it in a great way to give sort of the introduction to the fairy tale without lingering on it too long, because there's backstory that's required for Snow White, and it's interesting how different versions handle that. So it was a nice way of sort of establishing the kingdom and the passage of time then later too.
I agree. I like it. I mean, it is a bit of a dorky model, but it works.